welcome to a unique episode of Metal Forge Reviews. I'm Ben Foe.
I am Brandon Green.
Nice to see you all. We are not together right now due to the pandemic. We think it's just most important for everyone to try and stay safe, stay home if you can, and just get cozy and things like that. But we still want to bring you great content. And today's content is going to be 5 considerations of being a music consumer in the digital age. This was actually spurred from a conversation that I had on the Brain Smasher live stream that happened on April 10th, where they kind of threw me in the hot seat and asked me, what is it about digital music versus CDs and vinyl collections and things like that. So I thought this would be a really cool conversation that Brandon and I could have as people who have would you consider yourself to kind of be like somebody who's kind of in between both worlds?
Yeah, I would say so. I'm going to get to those points later on, but as somebody who's kind of always on the go and in and out of cars and in different places and at work, and unfortunately my work, it's sort of hard for me to listen to music there. I would say I sort of have to be in between.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these opinions are definitely ours, but we really want to hear your opinions as well. So this is something that we're going to kind of look at your comments and review and kind of get back to down the line. So our first point here is ritual and listening habits. And how you buy music really depends on how you listen to your music. As you were just saying, like, you're pretty much more geared towards listening to your music like in the car or something like that versus somebody like Brain Smasher and Marty Worm. Those guys seem to have like dedicated like listening rooms. Like you go into your room, you sit down, you put on your vinyl, you put on your cassette. So like your listening habits, I think, really have a big to like how you consume music. It's really got to do with that.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a little jealous of that. I feel like as a metalhead, it's something I feel like I should be doing. It's like I feel like it's a rite of passage that everybody has that, iconic listening room where you've got The Mantle on vinyl or Hammerheart on vinyl, and that's where like you go and dive into your deepest of thoughts and enjoy the darkest of music. And I feel like I should have that, but at the same time, given that I have a dedicated spot for studio work and a dedicated spot for doing video work, it's hard for me to have a dedicated spot to collect all of those physical copies of albums, although I really should. And I think it's something that over time, hopefully I can start to develop. But how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think that you really touch on it perfectly. I think that there's really something zen about having that moment where you get that CD or that vinyl or that cassette in, and like you sit down and you open it for the first time and you're looking through it and you're like, whoa, and then you put it into your player and then you're consuming the visual aspects of it, the physical aspects. It's tangible, it's in your hand, you're flipping through the liner notes or whatever, or you're opening that poster for the first time. There's something really magical about that, and I think that you really lose that when you consume digital music. So I think that those are really interesting points that we just hit there. Anything that you want to add before we move on?
I totally agree. It's like, think of it, what's like a favorite album cover of yours? Like the first time you saw it, you were like, oh my God, this is perfect.
Just kind of right off the top of my head, I guess maybe Saturnus's Martyr with the lady floating down the river. I thought that was very powerful.
Yeah. I have a couple of them. Like I've already mentioned The Mantle, but I love that album cover. It's like murky looking and mystical looking, and it's a photograph that's like sort of starting the traditions of what atmospheric black metal bands sort of do with the worship of nature and all that kind of thing. And I've always loved like Opeth's album covers, like the early stuff, like Morning Rise and Orchid was like, I thought kind of ballsy. It just had like a giant pink orchid on the front of it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's something about that. Like when you have it on, when you're staring at your tiny screen on your phone, you sort of lose that magic, you know?
Yeah, that brings us into the next point here, which is the totality of the experience. Music is an art form, and there's something that really ties the sonic art, like with the visual aspect too. And I think it's really, really important when you're sitting there, you're listening to something, and then you're also seeing something that the band has put out kind of like concurrently, like there's a thought process that goes into album art. There's a thought process that goes into liner art where the band wants you to experience that, not just like the sonic aspects of it, but also the visual aspects and album art, liner notes, lyrics. They really pull an album together. And digital platforms like Bandcamp have made kind of a workaround by allowing artists to include high resolution images, PDFs, document files, so you can kind of get that. But like you said, it's not the same like on a screen. There's something just powerful about like holding it in your hand and kind of almost becoming one with the whole experience.
Yeah, and I love when bands pay attention to that. Like I feel like in the digital age, it's a little easier for bands to fall victim to, and maybe victim's not the right word, but fall into that category of a type of musician that doesn't produce the full experience. And, you know, coming from like me, you know, being in Marrowfields, that was an interesting part of the success of that record was actually the album art. And I feel like
By Kishore Hollenbeek.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Shout out to Kishore.
yeah, shout out to Kishore. He absolutely killed that. And when the album first was, you know, considered to be put on Black Lion Records, the biggest thing that brought them in and what was made them interested was the album artwork. So I thought that that was sort of interesting, and then it got me thinking. I was like, you know, that makes sense. When I used to go to a record store and try to figure out something that I was gonna buy, you're looking at the album art. You know, you're walking up and down the aisles and you're like, what looks cool? What do I want to take home with me? And you know, I feel like that's like what reasons why earlier bands like Mayhem and all those bands sort of took off at the time, because nobody was doing that graphic crazy artwork on the front of it. You know, and it's kind of funny. Like we did this back in the top 5 video. We talked about like the whole cohesive experience with the album artwork thing. And, you know, for me, it was like Cruelty and the Beast. When I picked that up when I was a kid, that was like, there's a chick in a bathtub and it looks super dark and like angry. And I should probably get it, even though I'm in like 6th grade and probably shouldn't listen to it. So, you know, it sort of fit into that mold. And I feel like we do lose that as part of the digital age, and that totality of the experience really comes back into play there.
Yeah, and getting to what you were just talking about, going to a store and purchasing albums, really transitions well into our next point, which is purchase power. And by power, I mean the power of the consumer. For a while, digital rights management kind of handcuffed consumers of particular platforms, mostly Apple. The company dropped their digital rights management back in 2009. And if you buy a CD or a vinyl or a cassette, you hate it, you can just throw it out on the interstate. Like Brain Smasher was telling us about how he was listening to some album and he literally like 3 songs in, he like pushed it out of his like, you know, CD player or cassette player or whatever in his car and like threw it on the highway because he hated it that much. Like when you buy something, it's yours. And I think that that's something that's really powerful for the consumer. And not a lot of agencies are doing digital rights management, but like, what are your thoughts on like, you know, purchasing something digital versus purchasing something that's physical?
Well, it's kind of interesting right now because in the digital movement, I feel like artists really aren't properly managed in the era of like Bandcamp does a really good job. They do the whole name your price thing, and they've got charts and everything like that where you can follow bands that are doing well and find hidden gems and everything. That's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking more about like your Spotify's, your Google Plays, your Apple iTunes, and all that sort of thing. I feel like artists aren't properly compensated in that line for digital consumption, and what an artist is owed, I feel like is not really properly identified. And I hate to say it, but Lars was right.
Yeah, man.
Like, I know people hated on him for a long time during the whole Napster thing when people were pirating Metallica's music and he had a problem with it. And, you know, I have to admit at the time I probably wasn't mature enough to really understand where he was coming from. But he, I think, saw the writing on the wall with the direction of things were going. And
Yes.
this is where we're at now. And it's so interesting because you have those schools of thought of, you know, do I want to consume this in my listening room where it's the full, you know, experience, or do I want to do sort of a handicapped, lesser version of it where it's, you know, only through your earbuds staring at your phone screen? You know, it's interesting because it's like, you're right. When you buy it digitally, you do own it, but that's not tangible. That's the equivalent of you having money in your bank account and looking at the numbers, you know?
Yeah, dude, I totally agree with you. Lars really did see the writing on the wall, and kind of really pioneered the whole what say do the artists have in the era of this upcoming era, this new era. And for a long time, it's really been so much about what the labels having power over the bands and things like that. And I think that's a really good discussion for another time. But moving on to what we have here, our fourth point that we have is audio fidelity. Now, music is totally subjective. If you like the sound of cassette and vinyl, buy those. Go for it. If you don't mind high fidelity digital files like FLAC and WAVE and UGG Vorbis and things like that, you know, Bandcamp allows you to download those files too. And a good engineer should do what they get paid for and create a flawless recording that can be transferred to either digital or analog formats, and they still sound awesome. I was really, really disappointed when I bought the Anathema Judgment on vinyl. I don't know who, I wish I could throw somebody under the bus right now. I don't know who printed that, but like there was like clipping and all this stuff. And as I was listening to it, I was like, this is not like a good transfer. Somebody didn't use like the appropriate masters or something like that. But I love like the warmth of a well transferred vinyl, of a well transferred cassette. There's something that just sounds different about those things. Like, what are your thoughts on like audio fidelity in analog and digital formats, especially you as a very good, well experienced audio engineer?
So, I mean, you're absolutely right. The whole mastering process that goes into doing tape and doing vinyl is totally different. And it's interesting, when you work with a vinyl company, a lot of them give you exactly what they're looking for loudness units. And a mastering engineer, that is their responsibility to hit those targets. I mean, I'm not a mastering engineer. I sort of do a bedroom version of that with tools that I have at my disposal. And I can get pretty close to most things. I don't have by any means what a professional mastering studio would handle. But I mean, it's sort of interesting because I find it funny that the cassette age has come back. You know, like you've got, like I remember being younger and when CDs came out and I used to have tapes, like I had Master of Puppets on. Again, Master Puppets comes up. I guess we're Master Puppets channel. The tape that I had, you know, I remember when I could get it on CD and I was like freaking out because I was like, this is going to sound so much better. And I remember it did sound amazing. But if I still had that tape if I still had Master of Puppets on cassette, that's like a novelty collection item. And people in our friend group especially, and people all around that collect tapes would be like, yeah, that's an awesome thing to have. And it's interesting to see because they do sound different, and that I feel like our generation, younger 30s and stuff, where we grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, and the way we consumed things, and we saw this massive transfer of how music has been consumed, and it's still changing. It's interesting because our generation is now working and we have jobs and we want to relive some of that nostalgia. So I feel like that's why you're seeing that resurgence of those forms.
Yeah, dude, there is and I think this is something that we talk about quite a bit, is that kind of resurgence of nostalgia, that resurgence of, going back to our days when things were different and stuff like that. And I think it's very, very cool. So, the last point, and I think one of the more interesting points here, is limitations. Buying a physical product means that you have to keep that somewhere. And I look at, Brain Smasher's room that he records his videos in, and he has an entire wall full of CDs.
It's pretty badass.
And it is badass, but like that's something that I don't have the capability of doing right now. Like I'm kind of like in between houses and like changing my life and things like that. Like if I had to move all that shit, that would take, one, forever, and two, I would need like an entire weekend just to like pack that up, organize it, sort it, Like it's easier to keep 30,000 songs on a hard drive or on a cloud somewhere than it is to have 4,000 CDs somewhere. And like streaming and downloads, they might not have that particular release that you're looking for. Like you were just talking about Master of Puppets on cassette. Like that's really, like you said, that's a novelty. That's a unique item that is probably, I don't know offhand, but on eBay, that might go for like double what you would pay for when it came out. So there's limitations, not only in like the realm, like the physical realm that we exist in, but also like limitations of what you'll find. Like some artists are releasing only vinyl, and some artists are releasing only CD and not digital, and not putting their music on Spotify or Google or Apple or whatever. So before we wrap up, kind of what are your thoughts on like the limitations that we're facing in the digital age?
Well, it's kind of cool because I feel like you've got sort of a punk rock and metal way of looking at it. Like with limitations, like there are people that want to do this thing, and there are a whole slew of people that want to have a listening room, and you can absolutely have that. And I mean, like I said before, I'm sort of jealous of it. I have space, but I kind of need to keep it modular in a way that I can transform it from video to audio and have room for band practices, and just throwing in vinyl and CDs and stuff in the middle of that I think would clutter it up too much for my personal taste. But for the people who have a listening room, like we're lucky, dude. And in New England area, like you drive up to New Hampshire or even Providence or Boston, like Providence, Boston has the Armageddon shop. They've got some really, really amazing old school releases if you want to add to your collection. And they have new stuff, too, that local bands put out. They've got, if you go up to Maine, you go up to all those places, there's so many areas on the East Coast to actually collect that stuff for that type of audience. But, I mean, yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It really comes down to where you're at in your life. And if you are settled down in a spot where you want to be a collector, then you can absolutely do that. And there are means of collecting those things. And I think the limitations are one of the reasons why I don't do this is I like to consume music pretty quickly. And when I hear about a new band, especially for us being people who like to review stuff and get our hands on things when it's relatively hot, streaming's the best way to do that. So what are your thoughts there?
No, I think that you're really onto something with like getting what's hot. And I was actually surprised, like when you did those couple of those recent shout out videos, I was like, dude, where did you hear these bands? These are amazing. And you're like, oh, I just like searched, the genre on Bandcamp. And it's really, I got to salute Bandcamp. I know we've mentioned them several times by now, but I was kind of an early adopter when I heard about that particular service. I was like, wow, this is really cool. They're really catered toward the artists. They're really catered towards the independent people. And major shout outs to, once again, Armageddon Shop, especially in terms of local artists.
Oh, yeah.
And if I'm going to consume something physical, it's 90% of the time, like I go out to a show, I'm picking up the band CD. I'm picking up a poster or a sticker or a patch or something like that.
Me too.
And just given, I know you are, yeah. We go to shows a lot together, so we're usually walking out with like an armful of merch or something like that. So just given the era that we're living in right now, we might not see local shows for a long time.
Yeah.
So like, I think it's very imperative that we take a moment, take 20, 30 bucks and go on to Bandcamp and buy your favorite local artists, their CD or their digital album, or, get like if you feel comfortable with it, get a shirt ordered, or order, get a poster sent to your house or something like that. Because we might not see local shows for the rest of the year. Like, do you have any those are kind of like my closing thoughts. And I really just want to shout out to Brain Smasher for allowing me onto the live stream. I'm pretty sure that Brandon and I are probably going to do one together in the future. But like, those are my closing thoughts. What are your closing thoughts?
I mean, I think this is the most important time to support an artist right now. I know things are really hard, and obviously if you don't have the financial means to do so, obviously you need to keep a roof over your head and take care of your family and be safe. But during this time period, this is the time for artists to get to work, to heal the world, to inspire others, to do things that, that unfortunately people who worship you aren't capable of doing. And that's why you're an artist. And those people need to feel the love. It is a wonderfully awesome place to be able to create, but it also can be kind of lonely and dark sometimes. And to feel that appreciation for, bands that are putting out new stuff, absolutely do that. There's so many different ways you can support an artist. Buy a patch, buy a CD, buy a tape, buy vinyl, ask them if you could donate to buy tickets for a future show that may be, unfortunately, in 2021, based off of some of the articles that I've been looking at. I mean, that's something that you should be doing. And, you could check back at our reviews of some of the stuff that's been released lately. But I kind of want to do a roll call here and ask a question. The top bands that, we've been pulling from Bandcamp that are sort of our favorites, that have been more of the underground, a little under the commercial releases. Is that a format that you guys like? Is that something that you want to see more of, top releases in a genre on Bandcamp? And that's a video we could do once a month to try and showcase artists that you might be interested in supporting. We did one recently on top fantasy-themed heavy metal bands, and there were some really killer releases on that. Lady Beast, Spell, Nighthawk, Solitary Sabered, Smolder, and Blazing Right. Those are all excellent bands, and we can put the link in the description for that if you want to check it out. And there's also some killer black metal bands, and we did that with the 10-year anniversary of a Kai de Lune React video that I had done. And there's just so much art out there, and these artists absolutely deserve your support. And I, for one, am humbled to see a lot of my friends on Facebook and stuff posting their Bandcamp collections. Shout out especially to like Dwight Eldridge. He's from Mourn the Light. That guy is always posting stuff about local metal and local collections, and trying to inspire others about, what are you listening to, and getting conversations going. So I love seeing that stuff. It's great. What are your thoughts?
I think that's all really great stuff, man. And yes, there is something to be said with supporting our local artists. And we're very lucky up here on the East Coast to have such a plethora of awesome punk, metal, hardcore bands. And it's really, it's kind of an evolving scene up here. You know, back in the mid 2000s, there was a lot of like crossover bands and hardcore bands, and now we're seeing a lot of black metal bands in you know the East Coast and things like that. And I think that if I'm really glad that we're doing this, that you and I are doing Metal Forge reviews, because for a long time I didn't really keep my ear to the ground, and I was just kind of playing the same albums over and over again from my youth, which is fine, you know. But like, there's something to be said. There's something so magical about discovering a band for the first time and hearing a band for the first time, or seeing a band live for the first time and being like, wow, this is unique. This is unlike anything I've ever heard before. Or wow, these guys are taking something and kind of putting their own spin on it, or this is something I've never heard before and this is awesome. So there's really no excuse to not really be supportive of the artists and the music that you like. Yes, times can be tough for a lot of people right now, especially if you're out of work, but just throwing names to the wind and going on social media and saying, hey, check out this band that I really like, or hey, check out this photographer or this illustrator or whatever that I really, really like, and they really inspire me. And when I've been feeling, you know, isolated and away from my family or whatever, like I listened to this music, or I looked at these pictures, and it really made me feel connected. That's what we really need at this time, is the feeling of connection. Music and art that has always done that for everybody that I know, that when we really kind of get down to the nitty gritty, more so than, oh, I just like to headbang or I just like to hear certain songs. It's really about that feeling of connection and that feeling of, wow, I'm not the only person who feels this way, or wow, this really helped me through a difficult time, or whatever. And that's really what it's all about for me. So Brandon, I can't believe like we've basically just chatted for a half hour. Like when I originally talked about this, I was like, yeah, let's just do like a 6-minute video.
I knew it wasn't
I
going to
think
be
that
6
this
minutes.
is, yeah, I love these cerebral videos that we're doing. It's a shame that I can't be there at the studio with you, but we're having this is a really strong topic that I think is totally worth talking about. And I think these cerebral videos, as we've been calling them, are just as important as our review videos, and are just as interesting too. So we want to hear what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts on being are you a millennial, or are you a 40-something-year-old? Or how do you consume music? What is your major way of getting your music? Do you do both? Do you like to collect vinyl and have a Spotify account? And also, what are you doing in this age of isolation, if you want to call it that, to stay connected, to support your artists, to support your local bands? Did you buy a ticket that a show was canceled? So we just want to know what your thoughts are in terms of how you're supporting music and artists. And we thank you so much for watching Metal Forge Reviews. Continue to support your favorite artists and bands, and make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy what you saw today. Take care.